The ancient quantum beacon had been sitting in the ruins for over 3,000 years. Elder Zephon had walked past it countless times during his visits to the old temple grounds. Today was different. Today his world was dying. Above the peaceful planet of Ashira Prime, the sky burned with enemy fire. The Vorthon Empire had found them. Their massive warships hung in orbit like dark metal moons, raining death upon everything below. Cities that had stood for centuries crumbled to dust in minutes. Gardens that had grown for generations turned to ash and smoke. Zephon was the last. The other elders lay dead in the council chambers, killed when the first bombs fell. His people, the Kelrani, had never known war. They were plant-eaters, peace-lovers, builders of beautiful things. They had no weapons, no armies, no way to fight back against the silicon monsters that had come to destroy them. The old alien pressed his three-fingered hand against the smooth surface of the beacon. Ancient symbols glowed to life, responding to his touch. He had studied the old texts, but never imagined he would need to use this terrible device. It was forbidden by their laws, against everything his people believed. But his people were dying. In the distance, a nursery school exploded. Children's screams echoed across the burning city. Zephon made his choice. The beacon hummed to life. Energy coursed through circuits older than his civilization. This device could send a message across the entire galaxy to any race that might be listening. His people had sworn never to contact other worlds, never to ask for help, never to disturb the peace of space. But peace was already broken. To any who can hear this message, Zephon spoke into the ancient device. His voice shook with fear and desperation. We are dying. Our children burn in their nurseries. Our cities fall to ash. The Vorthon Empire destroys everything we have built. We are a peaceful people. We have no weapons, no armies, no way to defend ourselves. If there is mercy in the universe, if there is justice among the stars, please help us, please. The message shot out into space faster than light, carried by technology his people had never understood. It raced across the galaxy, past dead worlds and living ones through the dark spaces between stars, and somewhere, in a small monitoring station orbiting a blue-green world, it was heard. Dr. Lisa Morgan was finishing her night shift at Deep Space Monitoring Station Alpha when the signal arrived. She had been listening to the sounds of empty space for 12 years, recording cosmic radiation and stellar noise. She had never heard anything like this. The transmission was unlike any known communication pattern. The mathematical structure was wrong, the frequency modulation completely alien. But underneath the strange sounds, Lisa heard something that made her blood run cold. Pure terror. Desperate fear. The sound of someone watching their world die. She recorded everything and immediately called her supervisor. Within an hour, the best minds on Earth were studying the signal. Dr. Alex Rodriguez, the military's top linguist, worked alongside Dr. Kate Sullivan, Earth's leading expert on alien life forms. They had never seen real aliens before, but they had prepared for this day. The language was impossible at first. The sounds these creatures made were nothing like human speech, but mathematics was universal, and the message contained star charts, coordinates, basic numbers. Slowly, painfully, they began to understand. They're asking for help, Alex said after 18 hours of continuous work. Someone is attacking them. They're dying. Kate studied the biological analysis of the voice patterns. These aren't predators. Look at the stress markers, the fear responses. These are prey animals, probably herbivores. They've never fought a war in their lives. The translation took 3 more days. When they finally understood the full message, the scientists sat in stunned silence. An entire peaceful civilization was being destroyed, and they had sent a cry for help into the darkness of space. By pure chance, humans had heard it. General Paul Hayes read the report in his underground office beneath the Pentagon. He was the commanding officer of Earth's most secret military unit, the Shadow Fleet. Most humans didn't even know it existed. While regular people looked up at the stars and wondered if aliens were out there, the Shadow Fleet already knew the truth. They had been preparing for contact with hostile aliens for 40 years. Their ships used technology stolen from crashed alien vessels. Their weapons were designed to fight enemies that normal humans couldn't even imagine. They were Earth's hidden guardians, the Watchers in the Dark. How far away? Hayes asked. 1,700 light years, his intelligence officer replied. Our fastest ships could be there in 6 days using the fold drive. Hayes thought about the peaceful aliens dying on their distant world. He thought about the aggressive empire that was killing them. Most of all, he thought about what this meant for Earth. If there were hostile aliens out there destroying entire civilizations, Earth needed to know about them. "Send the Nightfall," he ordered. "Captain Carter's team can handle first contact protocols. Tell them to investigate and assess. If these Kelrani are really peaceful, and if this Vorthon Empire is really as dangerous as it sounds, we need to know everything." Captain John Carter received his orders while his ship was docked at the hidden base on the far side of the moon. The UES Nightfall was the newest stealth destroyer in the Shadow Fleet, invisible to all known sensor types. His crew was the best Earth had to offer, soldiers and scientists trained to fight wars that regular humans couldn't imagine. Lieutenant Amy Chen, the ship's xenobiology officer, studied the translated message. "They sound genuinely peaceful, sir. No weapon signatures in their technology, no military structures in their social patterns. If they're really under attack, they won't last long." "What about these Vorthons?" Carter asked. Dr. Kate Sullivan had joined the mission as civilian advisor. "Silicon-based life forms, probably from high-gravity worlds. The attack patterns suggest they're extremely aggressive, possibly a warrior culture. They've been expanding their territory for decades, destroying anyone in their path." Carter nodded. His crew had trained for this kind of situation. Earth's policy was simple: protect peaceful species from aggressive ones, gather intelligence on potential threats, and make sure humanity remained hidden until they were ready for open contact. "Set course for the Ashira system," he ordered. "Maximum stealth protocols. We're going to take a look at these Vorthons, and they're not going to see us coming." The Nightfall slipped away from Earth's moon like a shadow moving across water. Its fold drive opened a tunnel through space-time, allowing the ship to travel faster than light without actually moving. To outside observers, it simply vanished. 1,700 light-years away, Elder Zephon sat in the ruins of his city and waited for death. The Vorthon bombardment had continued for 3 days. Most of his people were already gone. The beautiful towers they had built over centuries were broken stumps of melted metal. The gardens where children had played were craters filled with ash. He had sent his message into space, but space was vast and empty. Even if someone had heard it, even if someone cared, they would never arrive in time. The Vorthons would finish their work soon. Another peaceful world would become another silent grave in their growing empire. Above him, the Vorthon fleet prepared for their final assault. Commander Veltar studied his tactical displays with satisfaction. This had been easier than expected. The plant eaters had offered no resistance, fired no shots, caused no casualties. It was almost disappointing. His warriors preferred enemies that fought back. "Begin the final bombardment," he ordered. "Turn their planet to glass. Leave nothing alive." The Vorthon warships moved into position, their massive guns charging for one last devastating attack. In a few minutes, Ashira Prime would be nothing but molten rock and radioactive dust. Another victory for the Vorthon Empire. Another step toward galactic domination. None of them noticed the shadow that had appeared at the edge of their sensor range. The UES Nightfall had arrived, invisible and silent, watching everything. Captain Carter and his crew studied the alien fleet with cold professional interest. "Analysis?" Carter asked quietly. 237 vessels, his tactical officer reported. Heavy cruisers, destroyers, bombardment platforms. They're positioned for planetary sterilization. Carter looked at the peaceful world below, seeing the fires that covered its surface. He thought about the desperate message that had traveled across the galaxy, the cry for help from beings who had never known war. "Well," he said softly, "looks like someone called for help, and we're here to answer." The hunt was about to begin. The UES Nightfall hung in space like a ghost, invisible to the Vorthon sensors. Captain John Carter stood on the bridge watching the enemy fleet destroy the peaceful world below. 200 alien warships surrounded the planet, shooting at everything that moved. Cities burned, forests died, millions of innocent creatures suffered while the attackers celebrated their easy victory. "Distance to the largest enemy ship?" Carter asked his weapons officer. 40,000 kilometers, sir. Their shields are active, but they're not expecting an attack." Carter nodded. The Vorthons had grown careless. They thought they were the strongest predators in this part of space. They were about to learn how wrong they were. "Lieutenant Chen, prepare the boarding team. We need to get down to that planet and make contact with the survivors." Amy Chen checked her equipment one more time. As the ship's xenobiology expert, she would be humanity's first ambassador to an alien race. The responsibility terrified her. Everything they had trained for was about to be tested against the real thing. Transport ready, Captain, she reported. Dr. Rodriguez is standing by for translation duties. The teleporter beam carried them down to the planet's surface, materializing inside what appeared to be an emergency command center. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of burning vegetation. Emergency lights flickered in the darkness. And huddled in the corner, 3 alien beings stared at the humans with eyes wide with terror. Elder Zephan had lived for 200 years, but he had never seen anything like these creatures. They stood upright on 2 legs like his people, but everything else was wrong. They had forward-facing eyes like hunters. Their teeth were sharp and white. They moved with the fluid grace of predators. And when they spoke, their voices carried the deep tones of creatures that had evolved to roar, challenges at their enemies. Please don't hurt us, he whispered in his own language, Dr. Alex. Rodriguez activated his translation computer and spoke slowly. We are here to help. We received your message. We came to stop the attack. The translation came out as a series of musical tones, but Zephan understood the meaning. These creatures had traveled across the galaxy in response to his desperate plea. But looking at them, he wondered if he had called for help or summoned something worse than the Vorthons. What are you? Zephan asked. We are humans, Amy Chen replied gently, trying to keep her voice soft and non-threatening. We come from a world called Earth. We heard your call for help. Zephan studied the strange beings more carefully. Their clothing was clearly military, covered with tools and weapons. Their movements were precise and controlled, like soldiers who had trained for battle their entire lives. But most disturbing of all were their eyes. Cold, calculating. The eyes of creatures that viewed the world in terms of threats and targets. The Vorthons have many ships, Zephan said. Hundreds of them. You are only 3 beings. How can you help us? Carter smiled, and the expression made Zephan step backward. Human smiles showed teeth, and teeth meant danger to creatures who had spent millions of years avoiding predators. We brought our own ship, Carter said simply. High above the planet, Admiral Veltar was reviewing the final bombardment plans when his communication officer interrupted him. Sir, we're receiving reports from the outer patrol ships. 3 vessels have gone silent in the last hour. Veltar frowned. His warriors were disciplined soldiers who followed orders precisely. They would never break communication protocol without good reason. Send Squadron 5 to investigate, he ordered, and increase sensor sweeps of the surrounding space. Squadron 5 consisted of 6 heavy attack ships, each one capable of destroying a small moon. They moved toward the area where the patrol ships had vanished, their sensors reaching out into space, searching for any sign of trouble. They found debris instead of ships. The 3 patrol vessels had been completely destroyed, torn apart by weapons that left no recognizable pieces. Whatever had attacked them had done so with overwhelming force and perfect precision. No distress signals had been sent. No warning shots had been fired. The attack had been swift, silent, and absolutely lethal. Report to Admiral Veltar immediately, the squadron leader commanded. We have an unknown hostile in the system. The message reached the flagship just as Captain Carter was making his own announcement. Using captured Vorthon communication frequencies, the human ship broadcast on all enemy channels simultaneously. Attention Vorthon forces. Carter's voice cut through the alien chatter like a blade. You are engaged in genocide against a peaceful species. Withdraw from this system immediately or face the consequences. On the bridge of the Vorthon flagship, Admiral Veltar listened to the transmission with growing rage. The voice was speaking perfect Vorthon, but the accent was completely alien. Whoever these creatures were, they had been studying his people's language and communications. Unknown vessel, Veltar replied. You are interfering with a legitimate military operation. Identify yourself or be destroyed. Carter's response was immediate and chilling. We are the consequences you never saw coming. Veltar ordered his ships to find and destroy the source of the transmission. Advanced sensors swept through space, searching for any sign of the mysterious enemy. They found nothing. Whoever was speaking to them remained completely invisible. Then Squadron 5 exploded. All 6 ships died in the same instant, consumed by energy weapons that tore through their shields like they were made of paper. The attack came from empty space, from a direction where nothing existed. One moment the squadron was there, the next moment it was expanding clouds of superheated gas. Impossible, Veltar whispered. On the planet below, Elder Zephan watched the tactical display with growing horror. The mysterious humans had somehow destroyed 9 enemy warships without being seen or detected. Their technology was beyond anything he could understand. "How are you doing this?" he asked. Lieutenant Chen was monitoring the space battle through her communication device. "Our ship is equipped with stealth systems and advanced weapons. The Vorthans can't see us, so they can't fight back effectively. But they have so many ships," Zephan protested. "Hundreds of them." Dr. Rodriguez looked up from his translation computer. "Numbers don't matter if you can't find your target. Our people learned long ago that the best way to win a fight is to make sure your enemy never sees you coming." Above them, Admiral Veltar was learning that lesson the hard way. His massive fleet, which had seemed invincible against the defenseless Kelrani, was now blind and helpless against an enemy they couldn't locate. 3 more squadrons vanished in the next 10 minutes, erased from existence by weapons that struck without warning. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "we've lost 43 ships. We still have no contact with the enemy vessel." Veltar had fought in dozens of battles across the galaxy. He had conquered entire star systems and destroyed countless civilizations. But he had never faced an enemy like this. The unknown ship moved through space like a ghost, striking without warning and vanishing before his weapons could respond. "All ships, random evasive patterns," he commanded. "Full defensive formations. Prepare for—" The flagship shuddered as something enormous struck its hull. Emergency alarms screamed throughout the ship. Damage reports flooded the communication system. But impossibly, the sensors showed nothing nearby. Whatever had attacked them was still invisible. "Boarding pods detected," the security officer announced. "Multiple breaches on decks 7 through 12. Veltar's blood turned cold. The enemy hadn't just attacked his ship, they had boarded it. But how could boarding pods be launched from a ship that didn't exist on sensors? The answer came from the security cameras. Veltar watched in horror as creatures in black armor moved through his ship like deadly shadows. They were bipedal, roughly the same size as Vorthans, but they moved with a fluid grace that spoke of millions of years of evolution as apex predators. These were the humans. These were the creatures who had answered the Kelrani plea for help. The boarding teams moved through the Vorthon ship with surgical precision. They knew exactly where to go, exactly what to target, exactly how to cause maximum damage with minimum effort. They had studied Vorthon ship designs, learned their weaknesses, planned their attack down to the smallest detail. Within minutes, they had captured the bridge. Admiral Veltar found himself face to face with Captain Carter, who had somehow materialized in the middle of the flagship's most secure location. The human removed his helmet, revealing a face that would haunt the Vorthon's nightmares for the rest of his life. "Your fleet is surrounded," Carter said calmly. "Your ships are dying one by one. Your warriors are discovering what it means to be prey instead of predators. You have 2 choices. Surrender now, or we continue this demonstration until none of you remain." Veltar looked into the human's eyes and saw something that terrified him more than any weapon. Carter wasn't angry. He wasn't excited by the battle. He was simply doing his job with the casual efficiency of a professional exterminator. "What are you?" Veltar whispered. Carter smiled that terrible predator smile. "We're the help they called for." On the planet below, Elder Zephon received the news that the Vorthon fleet was surrendering. In less than 4 hours, a single human ship had defeated an enemy that had seemed invincible. His people were saved. The nightmare was over. Admiral Veltar sat in his captured command chair, watching his fleet fall apart around him. The surrender had stopped the immediate killing, but it had not stopped the fear. His warriors were receiving reports from across the system that made no sense. Ships appearing from nowhere. Weapons that ignored all known physics. And strangest of all, an enemy that seemed to enjoy the terror they created. The human called Captain Carter had released him back to his ship after a brief conversation that Veltar would never forget. The human had spoken in perfect Vorthon, describing in clinical detail exactly how many ways his people could destroy the fleet. But it wasn't the threats that frightened Veltar. It was the way Carter had smiled while making them. "Sir," his communication officer called out, "we're receiving strange transmissions on all frequencies." "What kind of transmissions?" The officer's voice shook as he replied. "It sounds like laughter, sir. Human laughter mixed with recordings of our ships being destroyed." Veltar listened to the broadcast and felt his blood turn cold. The humans were playing the sound of Vorthon ships exploding, mixed with the noise these creatures made when they were happy. It was psychological warfare of the cruelest kind, designed not just to defeat an enemy but to break their minds. On his tactical display, new contacts began appearing. More human ships were arriving, materializing out of empty space like ghosts becoming solid. 12 smaller vessels and 4 large ones, all invisible to sensors until they chose to reveal themselves. And at the center of the formation, a massive ship that radiated menace like a black star. The flagship of this new fleet broadcast a simple message. This is Admiral Steve Collins of the United Earth Shadow Fleet. All Vorthon vessels will remain in current positions while we assess the situation. Any ship that attempts to leave will be destroyed without warning. Veltar had commanded fleets across half the galaxy, but he had never heard a voice like Admiral Collins. It carried the cold authority of a creature that had spent its entire evolution climbing to the top of the food chain. When Collins spoke, even hardened Vorthon warriors found themselves wanting to hide. Down on the planet's surface, Dr. Lisa Morgan was setting up a temporary research station in the ruins of the Kelrani capital. She had arrived with the second wave of human ships, bringing medical supplies and communication equipment. Her job was to learn about these peaceful aliens and help them rebuild their shattered world. But the work was not going as planned. Elder Zephan approached her carefully, keeping his distance like a nervous animal. Even though Dr. Morgan spoke softly and moved slowly, the Kelrani could sense what she was. Every instinct developed over millions of years of evolution told them to run from this predator in disguise. "We are grateful for your help," Zephan said through the translation device. "But we must ask, what do your people want from us?" Lisa looked up from her medical scanner, confused by the question. "We don't want anything. We came because you asked for help." "But surely there is a price," Zephan insisted. "No species travels across the galaxy without seeking something in return." Dr. Morgan tried to explain human concepts of justice and mercy, but the translator struggled with ideas that had no equivalent in Kelrani culture. How do you describe the concept of helping strangers to creatures who had lived in isolation for thousands of years? How do you explain moral duty to beings who had never needed to develop such concepts? "Your people fight with great skill," Zephan said carefully. "Have you conquered many worlds?" "We've never conquered anyone," Lisa replied. "This is actually our first contact with alien life." Zephan stared at her in disbelief. "But your weapons, your tactics, the way you destroyed the Vorthon fleet, you fight like a species that has waged war across the stars for centuries." Lisa realized what was frightening him. "We learned to fight on our own world. Earth is different from most planets, more dangerous. Our evolution was shaped by constant conflict, predation, natural disasters. We didn't need to conquer other worlds to learn about war. We learned it at home." She activated her portable computer and showed him historical footage from Earth. Images of human wars, natural predators, volcanic eruptions, ice ages, asteroid impacts. The Kelrani elder watched in growing horror as he saw the kind of world that had created these deadly creatures. "Your planet tried to kill you," he whispered. "Every day for millions of years," Lisa confirmed. "The weak died. The strong survived. The strongest learned to help each other survive. That's why we came to help you. It's what we do." But even as she spoke, Lisa could see the fear in Zephan's eyes growing deeper. She had meant to comfort him, to show him that humans were capable of cooperation and mercy. Instead, she had revealed something that terrified him more than the Vorthons ever could. Humans weren't just predators. They were predators who had learned to work together. In space above the planet, the psychological warfare was reaching a breaking point. Captain Danny Wright's destroyer, the UES Phantom, had been running terror missions against the outer edges of the Vorthon fleet. His ship would appear next to an enemy vessel, remain visible just long enough for the crew to see it, then vanish again. The Vorthons never knew when or where the next appearance would come, but the real horror began when a group of Vorthon ships tried to break away from the main fleet. They had been moving slowly toward the edge of the system, hoping to escape without being noticed. Captain Wright's response was swift and merciless. The Phantom materialized inside their formation, so close to the lead ship that the two vessels almost touched. Then something impossible happened. Human soldiers appeared on the Vorthon bridge without using teleporters or boarding pods. They had somehow transported themselves through solid metal and energy shields. Sergeant Nicole Davis led the assault team with mechanical precision. Her soldiers moved through the Vorthon ship like a disease, spreading from room to room with unstoppable efficiency. But they didn't kill everyone they found. Instead, they left survivors. Broken, terrified survivors who could tell others what they had witnessed. The Vorthons were warrior species, bred for combat and conquest. But they had never faced an enemy like this. The humans fought with tools and techniques that seemed designed specifically to cause fear. They used weapons that caused pain without quick death. They moved through the ship's systems like they had built it themselves. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to be enjoying the work. "Please," one wounded Vorthon officer begged as Davis stood over him. "Why are you doing this to us?" Davis looked down at the creature with cold, professional interest. "You were killing civilians, children, peaceful beings who never hurt anyone. Did you think there wouldn't be consequences?" "We are soldiers," the Vorthon protested. "We follow orders. This is how war has always been fought." "Not anymore," Davis replied. "Now there are humans in the galaxy, and we have very different ideas about how war should be fought." She left him alive as planned. The survivors would spread their story throughout the fleet, describing in terrified whispers what the human soldiers had done. The psychological impact would be far more devastating than simply destroying the ships. Admiral Veltar received the reports from the attacked vessels with growing despair. His warriors, trained from birth to be fearless in battle, were beginning to crack under the strain. They had faced death before, but never like this. Never with an enemy that seemed to understand exactly how to break their minds. "Sir," his science officer approached with a data pad full of analysis results. "I've been studying the wreckage from our destroyed ships. The weapons these humans use, they're designed for maximum psychological impact. The energy signatures, the destruction patterns, even the way the ships explode, everything is calculated to create fear in witnesses." Veltar studied the data with growing horror. "You're saying they deliberately chose weapons that would terrify us?" "More than that, sir. I believe they studied our psychology before they attacked. They know exactly what frightens us, what breaks our morale, what makes us lose the will to fight. This isn't random violence. This is psychological warfare elevated to the level of an art form." The realization hit Veltar like a physical blow. The humans hadn't just defeated his fleet. They had dissected his entire species' psychology and used it against them. They fought with the cold calculation of scientists conducting an experiment, but the worst was yet to come. Admiral Collins contacted the Vorthon flagship directly, his voice cutting through their communications like a blade. "Admiral Veltar, you and your officers will report to my ship immediately. We need to discuss the future of your empire. And if we refuse," Collins' laugh was like ice cracking, "then we'll demonstrate why that would be a very poor choice." Veltar had no option but to comply. He and his senior officers were transported to the human flagship, a vessel that seemed designed to intimidate anyone who entered it. The corridors were dark and narrow. The air tasted of metal and violence, and everywhere they looked, they saw humans watching them with the patient interest of predators studying their prey. Admiral Collins met them in a conference room that felt more like an interrogation chamber. The human officer was tall and lean, with silver hair and eyes that seemed to see through flesh and bone to the soul beneath. When he spoke, the Vorthon fleet was falling apart from the inside. Admiral Veltar returned to his flagship to find his own officers questioning orders, abandoning posts, and in some cases simply staring at blank walls in shock. The humans had done more than defeat them in battle. They had broken something fundamental in the Vorthon mind. Captain Ben Foster's reconnaissance team had been working inside the Vorthon communication network for 3 days now. They moved through the enemy's computer systems like ghosts, planting false reports and spreading confusion. The humans understood something that most species never learned. The best way to destroy an army was to make them destroy themselves. Foster sat in his small stealth ship, watching the tactical displays with professional satisfaction. The Vorthon fleet was receiving contradictory orders, false intelligence reports, and fake emergency signals. Half their ships thought they were under attack by invisible enemies. The other half thought their own allies had turned against them. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're detecting weapons fire between Vorthon vessels in Sector 7. They're shooting at each other." Foster smiled coldly. "Perfect. Send them some more false sensor readings. Make them think there are human infiltrators on every ship." The psychological manipulation was working exactly as planned. The Vorthons had spent centuries conquering weaker species through overwhelming force. They had never learned to fight an enemy that was smarter than they were, more patient, and infinitely more cruel. Admiral Collins watched the chaos from his flagship with the detached interest of a scientist studying bacteria. The human battle group had moved into a perfect sphere formation around the Vorthon fleet, invisible to sensors, but clearly visible on human displays. They were no longer fighting a war. They were conducting an experiment in applied terror. "Admiral," his tactical officer announced, "the Vorthons are requesting permission to withdraw from the system." "Denied," Collins replied without hesitation. "They came here to commit genocide. They don't leave until we're finished with them." On the planet below, Dr. Lisa Morgan was discovering the true cost of human intervention. The Kelrani survivors had gathered in temporary shelters built from the ruins of their cities, but they no longer seemed grateful for their rescue. Instead, they watched the human relief workers with the nervous attention of prey animals surrounded by predators. Elder Zephan approached her with obvious reluctance, keeping his distance as if she might attack at any moment. "Dr. Morgan," he said through the translator, "we have been monitoring the communications from space. Your people are torturing the Vorthons." Lisa looked up from the medical supplies she was organizing. "We're conducting psychological warfare operations. The Vorthons need to understand that genocide has consequences. But the suffering you're causing..." Zephan's voice trailed off. "Some of their soldiers have taken their own lives rather than face capture." "Good," Lisa replied matter-of-factly. "Maybe their friends will think twice before attacking peaceful civilizations." Zephan stepped backward, horrified by her casual acceptance of enemy suffering. "You speak of their deaths like they mean nothing to you." Lisa paused in her work and looked at the alien elder with genuine confusion. "They were killing your children, Elder Zephan. They burned your cities and murdered your people for sport. Why should I care about their suffering?" "Because mercy is what separates civilization from barbarism," Zephan replied desperately. "No," Lisa said quietly. "What separates civilization from barbarism is the willingness to protect the innocent from those who would harm them. Your people believed in mercy and it nearly got you all killed. Our people believe in justice and that's why you're still alive." The conversation was interrupted by an emergency alert from the human fleet. Admiral Veltar, driven to desperation by days of psychological torture, had made a final suicidal decision. Rather than surrender his forces to the humans, he was going to ram his flagship into the planet's surface at near light speed. The impact would sterilize the entire world, killing every remaining Kelrani along with himself and his crew. Captain Carter received the alert aboard the UES Nightfall and immediately understood the implications. The Vorthon flagship was already accelerating toward the planet, building up enough velocity to turn the world's surface into molten glass. At their current speed, even destroying the ship wouldn't stop the debris from causing massive damage. "Time to impact?" Carter asked his tactical officer. 17 minutes, sir. Even if we destroy them now, the kinetic energy will still devastate the planet." Carter made a decision that violated every rule of space combat. "Prepare for emergency boarding action. We're going to teleport directly onto their ship while it's moving at combat speed." "Sir," his officer protested, "that's impossible. The energy requirements alone would kill the boarding team, and the speed differential would tear anyone apart who tried to materialize inside their hull." "Then we'd better make sure our calculations are perfect," Carter replied calmly. Lieutenant Commander Rachel Stone led the boarding team with the cold precision of a surgeon performing an operation. She had volunteered for the suicide mission without hesitation, along with 20 other human soldiers who understood exactly what they were being asked to do. The teleportation began, while both ships were traveling at a significant fraction of light speed. The energy requirements were enormous and the margin for error was zero. If the calculations were wrong by even a few decimal places, the boarding team would be scattered across several light years of space. Instead, they materialized directly on the Vorthon bridge. The enemy crew stared in shock as human soldiers appeared from nowhere in the middle of their command center. Admiral Veltar himself was frozen with disbelief, unable to comprehend how anyone could have survived such a transport. "Stand down your engines," Rachel Stone ordered, her weapon aimed directly at the Vorthon admiral's head. "Now." "Impossible," Veltar whispered. "You should all be dead. The energy differential, the speed variance, the quantum interference, We're humans, Stone replied simply. We do impossible things every day. The boarding action took less than 3 minutes. The human soldiers moved through the Vorthan flagship like a force of nature, disabling key systems and neutralizing resistance with brutal efficiency. But they didn't stop at preventing the planetary impact. They took Admiral Veltar alive. The interrogation that followed would become legendary among the few Vorthans who survived to tell about it. Admiral Collins and Dr. Kate Sullivan, the expedition's xenobiologist, conducted the session with the methodical patience of scientists dissecting a specimen. Your empire controls how many systems? Collins asked conversationally. Veltar, stripped of his uniform and restrained in a chair designed for human prisoners, tried to maintain his dignity. I will not betray military secrets. Dr. Sullivan consulted her datapad with clinical interest. That's fine. We already know most of what we need. We've been monitoring your communications for weeks. What we're really interested in is your psychology. She activated a holographic display showing images from human history, battlefields from ancient Earth, where primitive humans had fought each other with clubs and stones. Medieval sieges where armies starved cities into submission. Modern wars where entire populations had been systematically exterminated. This is what we call warfare, Sullivan explained calmly. Your people think they're fierce because they can destroy cities from orbit. But humans learned to be cruel on a world where mercy meant death. The images changed to show Earth's natural predators, lions hunting zebras, sharks circling wounded prey, wolves working together to bring down animals 10 times their size. But the most disturbing images were of early humans, working in coordinated groups to hunt creatures that should have been able to kill them easily. We didn't evolve to be the strongest or the fastest, Sullivan continued. We evolved to be the most persistent, the most patient, the most willing to work together to destroy anything that threatened us. Admiral Veltar stared at the images with growing horror. These creatures had spent millions of years learning to kill things bigger and stronger than themselves. They had turned cooperation into a weapon and patience into a tool of destruction. What do you want from me? He asked quietly. Collins leaned forward, his eyes reflecting the cold light of the interrogation room. We want you to send a message to every Vorthan fleet in the galaxy. Tell them that the age of easy conquest is over. Tell them that there are predators in space now who make your warriors look like frightened children. And if I refuse? Sullivan smiled, and the expression was far more terrifying than any threat. Then we'll demonstrate our methods on every Vorthan world until someone more reasonable takes your place. She activated another display, this one showing detailed anatomical charts of Vorthan physiology. Pain receptors, nervous system vulnerabilities, psychological pressure points. The humans had studied his species like laboratory animals, learning exactly how to cause maximum suffering with minimal effort. Your people call themselves warriors, Sullivan said softly, but you've never fought a species that learned warfare as a survival skill. You've never faced enemies who viewed torture as a form of communication. Admiral Veltar looked into her eyes and saw something that broke his spirit completely. Explaining, 3 months had passed since the last Vorthan ship fled from Ashira Prime. The galaxy was quiet now, filled with scattered reports of enemy fleets surrendering without a fight. Admiral Veltar's message had spread fear across every Vorthan outpost, and the once mighty empire was crumbling from within. The humans had won a victory more complete than any military conquest in galactic history, but victory had brought its own problems. General Paul Hayes arrived at Ashira Prime aboard a massive diplomatic vessel, bringing with him Earth's finest negotiators, scientists, and cultural specialists. They came with plans for trade agreements, technology exchanges, and mutual defense treaties. They came expecting gratitude from the species they had saved from extinction. Instead, they found a world of frightened survivors who could barely look their saviors in the eye. Elder Zephon met the human delegation at the ruins of the old spaceport, keeping his distance like a nervous animal approaching a predator. His people had rebuilt parts of their cities, but the construction was different now. The new buildings had thick walls and deep shelters designed not for beauty but for hiding. General Hayes, Zephon said through the translation device, his voice carefully polite. We welcome you to our world. We are grateful for what your people have done for us. Hayes studied the alien leader with growing concern. The Kelrani's body language spoke of deep fear masked by desperate courtesy. This wasn't the grateful welcome Earth's politicians had expected. Elder Zephon, Hayes replied carefully, We've come to discuss the future. Our species have much to offer each other. Yes, Zifon agreed quickly. The future. That is what we must discuss. They met in a temporary building constructed from salvaged materials. The human delegation sat on one side of a long table, while the Kelrani representatives huddled on the other, maintaining as much distance as possible. Dr. Lisa Morgan, who had worked with the Kelrani for months, noticed how they flinched whenever a human moved too quickly or spoke too loudly. We propose establishing a permanent embassy here, General Hayes began. A small diplomatic staff to facilitate communication between our peoples. The Kelrani exchanged nervous glances. Elder Zephan spoke for all of them when he replied, General Hayes, we are deeply grateful for your salvation. But we must ask, we would prefer if your people did not remain on our world. The human delegation sat in stunned silence. They had expected requests for aid, for protection, for continued cooperation. They had not expected to be asked to leave. I don't understand, Dr. Morgan said. We came to help. We saved your civilization. Yes, Zephan replied quietly, and that is why we ask you to go. The truth came out slowly, painfully, through hours of careful conversation. The Kelrani had been watching human behavior for 3 months. They had seen how the relief workers discussed casualty statistics with clinical detachment. They had observed human children playing games that involved hunting and killing imaginary enemies. They had listened to human music that celebrated war and conquest. Most disturbing of all, they had noticed how humans looked at them. Not with hatred or malice, but with the analytical interest of predators evaluating potential prey. Your people are kind to us, Zephan explained. You bring medicine, food, building supplies. You work very hard to help us rebuild, but when you think we are not watching, we see something else in your eyes. What do you see? Hayes asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer. Measurement, Zephan replied. You look at us and calculate. How fast can we run? How well can we hide? What would it take to hunt us if we became your enemies? Dr. Morgan started to protest but stopped when she realized the alien was right. It was unconscious, instinctive, but humans did evaluate every creature they met in terms of threat assessment. It was how their species had survived on a world filled with predators. We don't mean to frighten you, she said softly. We know, Zephan replied. That is what makes it so terrifying. This behavior is natural to you. You cannot help but see the universe in terms of hunters and prey. Even when you try to be kind, you are still predators. General Hayes leaned back in his chair, finally understanding the scope of the problem. Earth had expected to become humanity's first alien allies. Instead, they had become the galaxy's boogeyman. What would you have us do? He asked. Leave us in peace, Zephan said simply. We will rebuild our world. We will remember what you did for us. But we cannot live with the knowledge that creatures like you are watching us. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication from Earth's deep space monitoring stations. Another distress signal had been detected, this one from a star system nearly 2,000 light-years away. A peaceful species called the Mindari were under attack by an aggressive empire called the Hegemony. General Hayes read the report with mixed emotions. Another innocent species facing extinction. Another call for help echoing across the void. Another chance for humanity to prove itself as the galaxy's protectors. But he also saw how Elder Zephan reacted to the news. The Kelrani leader's eyes filled with pity for whatever species had sent the signal. You will answer their call, Zephan said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Hayes replied. We have to. And they will see what we have seen. And they will fear what we have learned to fear. Admiral Collins received his new orders while the human fleet was still patrolling the former Vorthon territory. The Shadow Fleet would proceed to the Mindari system immediately to assess the threat and respond as necessary. It was the same mission they had completed so successfully at Ashira Prime. Captain Carter stood on the bridge of the UES Nightfall as the ship prepared to enter fold space. His crew had changed over the past months. They spoke less, smiled less, and approached their duties with the mechanical precision of professional exterminators. The victory over the Vorthons had taught them something about themselves that they couldn't forget. They were very good at being monsters. Lieutenant Amy Chen reviewed the intelligence reports on the Hegemony with clinical interest. Another aggressive empire. Another species that needed to be taught the rules of the new galactic order. She found herself looking forward to the work with an enthusiasm that would have horrified her former self. Estimated arrival time? Carter asked his navigator. 4 days, sir. The fold drive is operating at optimal efficiency. Carter nodded and returned to studying the tactical projections. The hegemony had a smaller fleet than the Vorthons but more advanced weapons. It would require different strategies, different psychological approaches. But the outcome would be the same. They would learn to fear the shadows between the stars. Dr. Morgan remained on Ashira Prime even after the diplomatic mission ended. She couldn't leave the Kelrani, not when they still needed medical assistance and technological support. But her work had become lonely and isolated. The aliens she had come to help treated her with polite terror. Grateful for her aid but desperate for her to leave, she established her research station in the ruins outside the main city, close enough to provide help but far enough away to avoid frightening the survivors. At night she would sit outside her shelter and look up at the stars, wondering what humanity had become. The answer came in reports from across the galaxy. Human ships were appearing in dozens of systems, following up on Veltar's broadcast with personal visits to Vorthon outposts. They didn't attack unless provoked, but their mere presence was enough to send entire fleets fleeing into deep space. More disturbing were the new distress signals that Earth's monitoring stations were detecting. Not calls for help against aggressive enemies, but desperate pleas from peaceful species who had heard rumors about the shadow demons and wanted to surrender before the humans found them. Humanity had become the thing that other civilizations used to frighten their children. Elder Zephin visited Dr. Morgan one final time before she left Ashira Prime. He brought gifts from his people, artwork, music, literature that represented the best of Kelrani culture. It was both a thank you and a goodbye. Your people saved us from extinction, he said as they stood together watching the sunset over the rebuilt city. But they also changed us forever. We can never again believe that the universe is a safe place. We know now that there are creatures in the darkness who can destroy entire civilizations without mercy. That's not who we are, Morgan protested weakly. Perhaps not, Zephin replied, but it is who you have become. You came to our aid as saviors, but you leave as legends of terror. Future generations of Kelrani will tell stories about the shadow people who came from the darkness to punish the wicked. But they will also know that these shadow people are still out there, watching and waiting. Dr. Morgan departed Ashira Prime the next day, carrying with her the knowledge that humanity's first contact with alien life had been both a complete success and a terrible failure. They had saved a peaceful species from extinction, but at the cost of becoming the galaxy's newest nightmare. The UES Nightfall and its fleet folded space toward the Mindari system, ready to answer another call for help. Behind them, they left a world of survivors who would spend the rest of their lives looking over their shoulders, wondering when the helpful monsters might decide to come back. Admiral Collins filed his mission report from the bridge of his flagship, documenting humanity's emergence as the galaxy's apex predators.